western Nebraska taxpayers. The focus will be on the Environmental Protection Agency. Are there EPA programs that affect the district which you would act to change through legislation or funding options?
The short answer is yes, I want to take and have been taking action to limit the power of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. They want to regulate dust, unreasonably so. And the fact is, it hurts the economy. It's unnecessary. It's not based on sound science. When you look at other impacts of the EPA, they're reaching into the economy and clobbering employers. So it should stand to reason that unemployment stays high when the EPA is so empowered. And I have to say that both parties have empowered the EPA to levels. Shame on the Republicans for passing the horse slaughter ban, the effective ban on horse slaughter. That happened under Republican majority. That shouldn't have happened. So that's why we need to change the way things are done in Congress, and that's why I've signed on to the plan that when an agency comes up with a new rule that's very expensive, it has to come to a vote of Congress. It shouldn't just happen because there happens to be some executive authority that was placed there by Congress. Let's pull that back. Let's pull that power back to the people and those representatives of the people in Washington, and ultimately, though, each and every individual. Thank you.
Ms. Davis.
I think we've seen various things come from the EPA. One thing of the EPA that I support was the recent decision to elevate to E15 levels. I see this as a positive step not only for our country, but for Nebraska in particular. I think there's huge potential for ethanol in our state, not just corn-based ethanol, but increasingly other forms as well. In terms, though, of other things from the EPA, I'd like a little audience participation. If you have thought of or even heard the phrase acid rain in the last year, will you raise your hand? Okay, I'm seeing maybe 10 hands or so out of a room of many more people. I say that because even though cap and trade clearly is dead in the Senate, I think we have forgotten the original reason why cap and trade occupied so much of the discussion of the last 2 years. I say that because the correlation here is that the reason why most of you in this room didn't raise your hand when I asked you about acid rain is because the system that was put in place to regulate sulfur was a cap and trade system. I'm not saying that I think the bill that passed in the House was perfect, far from it, but in terms of an actual mechanism to make a dent in our carbon emissions, it was a start, it was a consideration. Now clearly it wasn't, there wasn't enough political will behind this because it didn't pass in the Senate. But the idea of doing nothing, of regulating carbon in our environment, I see as a bad thing. Especially, it's not just an environmental aspect, but especially when you consider what other countries are choosing to do of their own volition. We are light years behind countries like China, countries like Denmark and Spain, which are doing a tremendous amount to make jobs happen in green technology. We could be at the forefront of this. We're choosing not to be.
Mr. Hill.
Okay, Congress has the responsibility to regulate. It's not the executive branch. They implement, they execute what the Congress says. So the EPA, the Congress can limit the scope of the EPA, and the Congress needs to, and they've needed to for a long time. In many ways, it's an ineffective agency. It does a lot of things that don't need to be done. It costs a lot of money. The idea we're going to regulate dust, I won't ask for a show of hands, but I don't think anybody probably here in the last year has been too worried about, the risk of dust to their health. So, other than your allergies, I guess, that would be my wife. The EPA is just another big government bureaucracy. It's got a purpose. It's got some legitimate functions. But you can look at how they've, most of the money in the past years that they've collected from fines and things like that have been from the military due to things like you have weapons ranges with lead on them, and you've got motor pools that leak oil. So a lot of the funding they've just taken from the Department of Defense budget. So I think that the EPA needs to be reined in. It has to have its scope narrowed. That's a responsibility of Congress. They have that power. It's gone a lot of years. And it's not just that Congress can't just look at that organization and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. They have that responsibility to do something about it, because they're really supposed to be taking their marching orders from Congress.
Ms. Davis will start the next question.
This comes from the independent cattleman in Nebraska. What are your personal views on the current marketing structure in the livestock industry? And do you think the current proposed Grain Inspection, Packers and Stockyards Administration rule for the sale, what's your opinion?
I think what this question speaks to should be concern on all of our parts towards vertical concentration in the marketplace. I say this because tomorrow, incidentally, is the Independent Cattlemen's Association annual meeting. I will not be there. I've got previous commitments in Chadron. I was there last year, and I was grateful for the invitation in large part because my background is in hospital chaplaincy. It's not in the cattle industry. I say this, though, because thankfully many people over the last 2 years of my campaign have done a lot to educate me on what concentration in agriculture means. I'm greatly concerned by the fact that only a few packing plants control a majority of the market share in this country. They control both ends of the spectrum, because not only are they able to control the numbers in terms of what comes into the plants, but also the price on the other end. I think we should all be vigilant and all concerned about the lack of enforcement of antitrust legislation, especially as it relates to gypsum. The reason this is important is because, again, this affects not only us as consumers, what we pay in the marketplace, but far more importantly is the bigger picture. That if we want small and medium-sized producers to stay in operation, we can't live in a world where we simply accept high concentration in the marketplace like this. I say this because, again, I think a lot of us don't necessarily know a lot about this, but the reality is it affects all of us. The larger our farms and our ranches get, the smaller our communities become. If we are vigilant as to what this actually means for us for vertical concentration, it affects us all.
Mr. Hill.
Yeah, I'll confess, I want to learn a little bit more about this issue. I wish they had extended that the time on the rules, I don't trust the packing industry. When I look at the packing industry, what I see is a very small number of companies, a lot of foreign ownership, and we've got regulations that have favored that. For example, we've had the packing industry abuse our illegal immigration laws, hiring a lot of illegal immigrants, knowingly, repeatedly. We turned a blind eye to it. We make a show of doing a raid once every 10 years. Don't really hurt them economically for doing that, and maybe in another 8 years or so we'll do another so-called raid on them and give them several months advance notice when we do it, like we have in the past. When you let people operate that way, it's almost like sending jobs overseas, except instead of the facilities going overseas, we're going overseas and bringing the workers in. So how do people that run their business differently and hire American workers and pay them decent wages and obey labor laws and don't abuse the advantages of hiring illegal immigrants? How do they compete? So in terms of marketing, it gets stickier and it gets stickier. The marketing rules, I understand what they're trying to do in a general sense. The devil's in the details on whether it really works well or not. So, my feeling is that, the big packers have manipulated the market a little bit. It's not as free as it should be. But I do want to learn a little bit more about that, and that's why I wish they had extended that period and heard a little bit from a few more different sides on the issue.
Congressman Smith.
Well, as I talk to livestock folks, sometimes on their place, sometimes in Washington, sometimes at a meeting downtown Valentine, I certainly get an earful on this very issue. And I was involved in the debate on the Farm Bill, where the interested parties on these issues came to an agreement. We put that in the Farm Bill. Now it's viewed that there is this end run because there's a new administration to attempt to reach further. And I am sensitive to arguments that there needs to be enforcement of the current laws, antitrust and others, make sure that the transactions are transparent, to make sure that we truly do have a marketplace that everyone has access to. I can't guarantee the outcome. I would love to have power, or maybe not, to say, hey, we're going to have great prices. But we need to make sure that the government lets the marketplace work, Let's have the disclosure of transactions, the transparency that we need, and so that even the smallest folks, the smallest operations, can have the strength to get larger. Actually, there used to be a lot of ranches larger than most of them today. But the fact is, the economy changes, the global marketplace changes. We need to allow flexibility, not a one-size-fits-all boilerplate approach of regulation that ends up slowing down the marketplace. Because I think we want to ensure opportunity rather than this attempt to ensure an outcome.
Mr. Hill will start the next question.
We'll go now back to another series of simple yes/no questions. First, will you support an effort to appeal the recently enacted health care bill?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
No.
Catch my bearing here. Mr. Smith will start the next question.
Would you vote to eliminate the Federal Department of Education?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
No.
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. Davis will start the next question.
Will you support the medical tort reform legislation?
It depends on what ultimately comes in it. As it stands now, no.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Hill will start the next question.
Will you vote for a government-wide ban on the funding of abortion, including forbidding tax dollars paying premiums for the health insurance policies that do cover abortion?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Hill will start the next question.
Will you vote to extend all of the Bush tax cuts?
Yes.
Congressman Smith?
Yes.
Ms. Davis?
No.
Mr. Smith will start the next question.
Those are our final yes and no questions. This question comes from the media.